I am Dr. Jennifer Churchill. This is the Happy Healthy Leaders podcast. And I am joined with Nick Castner, my producer tonight.
Hello, Dr. Jennifer. It's great to see you. You're officially a podcaster, I would say. You know, we've like eased our way into it, but before we were just, kind of making banter in the green room, and you're like, we're hitting record and we're starting.
Yes.
So here we go. This is the type of energy I like.
Well, I thought I would actually just start. I know we're talking about generational diversity tonight and some topics and themes that I think are really relevant to maybe some, what might be going on for you potentially, but also in our workforce, there's lots of shifts and changes and trends. And I thought, what a better way to kick it off with just a personal share, actually, around just some of the differences amongst generations and how we show up when we're not feeling great at work.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And so the company, this is like I said on the first episode I was on, my day job, it deals with I would say bridging the gap between like the hardcore Gen Z workforce and then the generation above me. I would say that there's like two distinct like types of people I work with. One, they're 30 and younger, and then the other are in the age bracket above that. I also think it's very relevant for this project because we've been able to collaborate so well in even though we come from separate generations. So it was a topic as we were texting back and forth over the past couple of days about like what should we talk about, and I think this is a good, like I'm happy that this is where we're landing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it was interesting. I know we've tossed around the idea a little bit for lots of reasons. One, we read that book, Arthur Brooks' book on From Strength to Strength. And obviously he talks about the second curve of people going into their middle-aged part of their professional life. And so I want to reference that book also in tonight's topic. But I think that another thing that is also like generationally different in terms of how people show up to work is like how they can show up when they're not feeling good, and what their, I guess, values are around sharing what is going on with them also, I think is a huge difference amongst generations. And the reason I bring it up is because obviously you and I were supposed to meet over the weekend. And you were so flexible with knowing, not really knowing the details of what I was going through the last few days. And it was just like really comforting knowing that it was a value of yours, that your mental health is a priority, for me to be able to say like, I can't show up today and record. I need some space and time, and like really all the energy I have is just to like show up for my clients right now. And so I just think that I wanted to share that because it's going on in real time, right? For me. And it's a big value difference amongst generations. Whereas I think I sit right in the middle of, I am the generation between the boomers, which is, 55 and up. And then I'm Gen X. Is that right? Yes. I'm Gen X, it's like 40 to 55. And then we have Gen Y, which is millennials, which I believe you fall amongst, right?
So it depends how you define it. I'm either a tail end of a millennial or in Gen Z. I do think I sometimes get loose with the like definition because I watch a lot of TikTok. Yeah. So it's like in some ways I'm a Gen Zer, right. But the 15-year-olds would probably not think of me as their own.
Right. So I think that you probably fit really I think you fit probably more, the majority of what you might show up as is more of that Gen Y millennial, but yes. You are on the cusp, right? You're on the cusp. Mm-hmm. And like, there's no like clear cutoff, like between, like, I still think I'm hip enough to like maybe show up and hang out with some millennials, but like, let's be honest.
You are.
But anyway, I just think it's like, I think it's helpful, like to like parts, obviously I want to share like really rich content and data as part of the show, but I also really want to lean into like what is happening in real time for both of us sometimes. And that is a value difference in terms of the generation above me, just because of the nature of the way they were raised and the world that they were, raised in. there's not a lot of awareness around mental health and treatment. And so I think just being able to acknowledge that we are shifting the world a lot with not only generational diversity being more inclusive, that we're able to, talk more in our workplace when we're struggling personally, and having more acknowledgement and acceptance around it, I think it's growing. There's still a lot of work to do. And we still need to show up and do our job. And I'm not discounting that we still have a job to do, but I think both can be true. We can hold space for both. Like we can hold people's hearts, but we can also encourage their minds to like be resilient. So I just think that that's a really big topic, and something just to acknowledge.
Yeah, if you're like looking down on the whole like if by looking down I'm talking about age bracket of like the way the younger generation is looking at mental health. I would say I have a more cautionary tale of when. Never say back in my day, we used to just go to work like that, especially someone saying like, oh, like I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling blank. You should first like acknowledge that feeling and look to validate and then build out the next steps. And even though if it's like, hey, I'm stressed, so I'm not going to work this afternoon, can sometimes be like, well, you got to work this afternoon. So like, let's create a plan together to make sure everyone in this party wins.
Right.
But the reaction should never be like, back in my day, I was walking up hills both ways. But to kind of reciprocate the like good vibes from one generation to the next, Dr. Jennifer, the one thing I really appreciate from it, and I think this could come with more experience as well, but I do think the younger generation that's in the workforce does not necessarily lean into the difficult conversation, whether that comes through like negotiating or even like performance reviews and just like having a tough conversation at work. And I do, and it's probably because like the mentors and colleagues are of generations above me, and they've done it more, so they may just feel more at ease. But that is one thing that I do think the Gen X and above it feels much more at ease at doing that. I think us millennials and Gen Zs can learn from.
Well, let's talk about the actual. I agree, like, because there is some experience there, but I also do think because we're still understanding how to collaborate amongst all generations and build generational diversity across our organizations, that we still, like, I would say even my generation and the boomer generation, while we may have more experience, I think we still have opportunities to learn how to understand all generations more. So let's talk about the 4 generations that are in the workforce now, like the age range, the like kind of the qualities that they bring to the table. And what are some benefits to having that diversity? And then the biggest thing that gets in the way, in my opinion, of us being able to have more generational diversity and acceptance and inclusion is our unconscious biases that we all have. And so I want to talk about that and how we can work with that a little bit. But then lastly, we have a new trend of retirees re-entering the workforce. And so people who have been retired, past age 65 or so for 4 or so years are wanting to re-enter the workforce for a variety of reasons. One, there's because of inflation and needing money to like support them through retirement is actually a real thing. And they're feeling more bored and have less of a purpose. So there is an entry of, let's say, a re-entry of more boomers back into the workforce too, and the pros and cons of that. So I think it would be interesting to talk about that a little bit as well, since it's a new trend. It's just it's hot off the press. So
I've seen the whole like retirees re-engaging thing just in the news, hot off the press as you will. But most of the data, like besides that one thing, I don't know anything of that, like any of the other trends that you just mentioned. So I will kind of let you kick it off.
Yeah. So in terms of the 4, let's talk about just the 4 generations that are in the workforce now. And obviously we have the boomers, which are 55 and older. Then we have Gen X, which is my generation between ages 40 and 55. Then we have Gen Y, the millennials, which is, I believe, 25 to 40. And that is actually the largest part of our workforce is the millennials and the Gen Y. And then we have the Gen Zs from age 16 to 25. So what's interesting about the generational differences is, so obviously we make a lot of assumptions about each generation when we're working with each other. And so I think one of the things that I would like to just talk about is our unconscious biases of that can get in the way of let's say collaborating more with someone who may be older, like you're younger and older. So what is your kind of thought around working with someone who maybe is 55 and 60 and older? Like what goes through your mind when you are kind of considering, yeah, just share with me what goes through your mind.
Yeah. So the first thing thought to myself was, all right, this is recorded. Don't say something really ageist.
Well, and ageism is real, right? It is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, like in most contexts where that happens, I approach the conversation of like they're at a place with great expertise. But so I'm either in it like purely to learn of like, all right, let me like absorb as much information as possible. Or there's certain cases where it's like, oh, well, I have my own expertise. So like, let's make sure that's shared to complement the entire room.
No, that's good. Yeah. That's great. I think if we were to like weave in something that I think people can hang their hats on when we're talking about these generational diversities is the two types of intelligence that we bring to the table. Like I would say my demographic and older would bring to the table more of that crystallized intelligence. Right. And that's what you're referencing, right? Is like the experience, the ability to really analyze a lot of information and, problem solve at a like very strategic level. And then what I would say middle-aged and younger still brings to the table, like I would say, 20s into the, late 30s, is more of that fluid intelligence where like new ideas are born. And where we have like you're more creative, like your intelligence still allows for like that kind of like creative synapses to fire, whereas we lose that, actually sadly really in our early 30s, and then it declines into our 40s and 50s. So I think if we could talk about it in a way of what are the actual physiological kind of intelligence aspects that each of our generations bring to the table, we can help like think about and make decisions differently when we're looking at a problem. Because what we do is we make a lot of assumptions that someone may not be able to bring, the same caliber to the issue, or the same, like, I don't know, obviously there's different skill sets that we bring to the table. And so, not making any assumptions about those, I think is the first step in seeking to understand what each individual brings to the table. That would be like one of my recommendations when we're thinking about like building generational diversity is acknowledging that we each, like everyone is on a different part of that continuum of intelligence, from fluid to crystallized intelligence.
Yeah, and there's certain contexts where having a mix of people in such like a brainstorm like that is crucial, and will generate more ideas in that context, because you want people on either end of the spectrum to respond and communicate with one another.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you hear the words unconscious bias, what comes to mind for you?
I normally hear it in the context of like race and ethnicity conversations.
Yeah.
And so that, like, when I hear that, I think of examples in that context. And I honestly I have not even applied it to an age context too frequently. So even starting, like, if you could even think of an example, then I'll, repack the last work week of examples I know I have.
So in terms of, we assume that actually boomers do not have a level of technology skill as as much as younger generations do. And so what's interesting is they boomers actually would be on the like more advanced edge of technology savvy than would my generation because of what,
Hmm.
like, so let me ask you, why do you think that is?
Hmm. I'm skeptical of the fact, even on it, honestly.
You're skeptical of that? Or you're skeptical
No,
of that?
yeah, yeah. But what? Why? What's the? I don't even have a guess. Like,
Because they're grandparents.
hmm.
Yeah. So my generation, we're not grandparents yet. I mean, some can be really young
Yeah,
grandparents, but
early.
but
Yeah.
like, so there is actually an extreme like emotional motivation to become more technology savvy when you become a grandparent, because most grandparents actually sadly don't live near all of their grandchildren. And so they're motivated to like learn how to FaceTime, learn how to take pictures, how do you share pictures. And so there's like, so technology from like just a personal usage perspective is what I'm referencing here. But we make the assumption that they aren't as savvy as younger generations, when in actuality, because they have a personal and emotional motivation to be more technology savvy, because most of them are grandparents, we make an assumption about that in the workforce. So obviously there's other aspects of technology that are more relevant in, let's say, in like a workforce or workplace, if you will, um, that they're still able to learn. And especially this reentry of retirees, there is going to be like a learning curve for them. So there is going to be like, obviously, if managers do want to hire, and obviously you can't like not hire someone because of age, and that will be an interesting process as we move through this year. But I would say that's a bias that we make about boomers than like, let's say, my generation. But biases, that's also kind of a bias that people have around unconscious bias, is that it's mostly around gender and ethnicity potentially, and obviously we have probably more biases in those demographics, if you will, than others. But it's important to raise it here too, because what's interesting is we can actually, I can give a really good example. And this is Amy Cuddy, who's a sociologist. I don't know if you've read any of her work or not, but she asks, she's like this very like proper, very like clean cut professor. And, she asks, what kind of music do you think I listen to? And, when she's like trying to introduce the concept of unconscious bias, and people will assume like classical music and like maybe jazz and maybe country. And she is like one of the biggest Grateful Dead fans.
Wow.
And so just even that, in terms of people make like really quick assumptions around kind of just any kind of descriptor of us. So it's easy to do it. And that's obviously not a damaging bias, assuming someone's music type. But like when we talk about unconscious bias, obviously with ageism and, race and, um, gender, obviously there can be damaging effects of that. So it's interesting. We all carry them, is my point.
Yeah. Yes. What is the difference between like? Well, and I think I may even have an answer, but like an unconscious bias and like demographic trend. Like, for example, I would think boomers. My one thing that would be first thing that to come to mind would be they're more conservative than younger generations. But I don't have this at my fingertips, but I think there
So
is some data to back that up.
so yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, actually. So
Mm,
so obviously trends and stereotypes, let's give it another word, can contribute to our biases. And so that, which is why we have them. And but again, we're making a snap judgment based on a stereotype or a trend about everyone then pretty quickly without pausing to think. So we'll have our bias. And here's the thing. recognizing the bias versus moving on from it and applying it to each person. So that's the if we're going to talk about like maybe a treatment for this for people, not a treatment, but I would say let's call it a pro tip, is when you're recognizing like something coming up or you're making an assumption. This is where self-awareness of, going back to our self-awareness podcast episodes, we'll have to continue to do more of those. This is where self-awareness is critical, is like when you're thinking about wanting to be more effective in the workplace, like thinking about like elevating your self-awareness and what aspects of being in the workplace are important for you to be really self-aware around. And a lot of it is like, so what contributes to working well together is removing biases. And so when we like observe or are introduced to an individual, we make snap judgments based on not only just our personal historical data, but all of the generations that came before us that contributed to the stereotypes and the trends. And so we want to acknowledge what we notice and slow down and verify versus like make the assumption and move forward. So that would be my recommendation, is like, how do we integrate into working amongst generations or between, with generations more effectively, is always to elevate that self-awareness, slow down, recognize what my assumptions and biases might be as I'm being introduced to this individual and or group, and verify, like ask questions to seek to understand someone's stories versus, sticking to your decision and moving forward with it. So that would be the difference in response to the question.
My gut was saying like, don't assume. And that basically would like in summary be like what you just said. Yeah. And then, so other ways to like break down the cultural barrier, just what else like do you have additional thoughts, feelings around that?
The cultural, say that, can you ask that question?
No. So the breaking down the age gap. Excuse me. I was getting to a point I wanted to make next, but like what both from like the from an elder generation perspective to a younger one. How like what are some best practices to navigate this in a workplace?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe don't say elder.
Okay. More senior.
So
what are the words? What are the safe words? Obviously, I don't know. What are the safe words?
Well, older is fine.
Is older fine? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking too hard about older.
So, I think that, and like when you're like, that's the thing, like it's so hard to navigate what words are not, or are not going to offend someone, because if we look at Native American populations, for example, being an elder is an extremely like honored and like valued and respected role. And that word carries so much power. Like becoming an elder in certain cultures is an honorable thing. Right. So, but depending on who you are talking to in what country and what state of the United States, they may not feel the same way. So I would say, thinking about, first of all, acknowledging them by their name, first of all, is always a good idea. Right. And just seeking to understand their story, and having more experience is a wonderful descriptor. Like, like I think, you bring to the table like so much experience. I want to understand what it is you bring to the table. It's about just having those conversations versus, making those assumptions. I think something that I talk about a lot with my clients too is what is like, not only does every individual have a different purpose for why they do what they do, but every generation also has a very different purpose. And understanding their why, I think, is really, really powerful. Like I would say my generation and older is we were not always attached. I would say that we're shifting a little bit more now, but like our purpose and why was always more around how were we supporting our families, and meaning kind of always was a second like a second reason to work. Whereas I would say even my generation and then now younger, meaning actually carries more weight than how much money someone makes. So, that's where you could bridge the conversation amongst, across generations, is understanding someone's why. And usually it comes back to the same, like the same reason of like, what's important to you personally. Like maybe having meaning in your role and adding value to the world is because you want to you want to create a better world for your own kids one day. Whereas, making money and like being successful and being able to support financially our kids one day is so that they grow up and have a good life, right? So there's that commonality. If you ask the question why 5 times and back up into it, usually it comes back to being able to support our family around a happy life. But the paths of getting there look a little different. So I would say that could be one way to do it. In terms of we could really dive into a whole episode in terms of like communication methods and modes of communication across generations is a huge thing in terms of like how people like to be communicated with. And there does need to be more acceptance on both sides. Like a lot of individuals that are younger that I work with prefer to text. I prefer to call. I prefer to, email. I mean, but I do it all versus whereas like the boomer generation, my generation and older would prefer to like pick up the phone and not text as much. So, but how do we bridge the gap? And it's through talking about it, but that's a whole nother set of tips I would say we could reserve for another episode.
Definitely warrants a longer conversation. But just a quick note to pause, because I've thought of it so many times in this conversation, in that you had just mentioned that like the context of the words that are used matters greatly. But boomer is such a negative term amongst like Gen Z that like, okay, boomer is like a meme that's used. So like I think we just referred to the demographic as they're called as the boomers. And that's just like such a funny, would make a group of a room full of high schoolers chuckle.
I know. So what do we do? So what do we do about that?
I think in this context, it's not like a negative deal. Like I don't think I don't think there's anything to do about it. But I was just like it came to mind, and it was like holding back a smile. So I thought I would say something. When it comes to leading a group or a team of intergeneration, how would you go about approaching that?
Yeah. What's interesting is my generation comprises 55% of the leaders in the workforce right now. So I think about this a lot. And so I coach a lot of leaders in my generation and older. And so I would say that it's like any kind of inclusive approach is starting to understand what matters to each individual first and not making any assumptions. And then talking about work style. Work style is a really big deal for different generations and can be a really big difference because what's interesting is I was at a client last week with a group of leaders that were, I would say like my generation and older, probably couched right in my generation and maybe a little bit older than me. And many of them are like they're like back in the office. They want to like be back in the office now more. They're going to be like 4 days a week, mandatory back in the office now. And so that's been a really big point of contention for generations that are younger who, started like really entered the workforce with much more flexibility than that. Work style and how to work together in different environments is going to be also like we've talked about this issue before, you and I, Nick, and now it's going to be a whole nother issue when it comes to generational differences as well. Yeah. So really, like, again, I feel like I say this a lot, but it really is the entry point, starting really deeply understanding what matters most to that individual, how they want to work, what their purpose and their goals are, and what is their career like trajectory in terms of what they would like to accomplish, so that you are helping really customize a development plan that meets their needs while still meeting the needs of the organization. I mean, there can't be it's not just all about each person. It needs to be about the whole collective as well, and driving to meet the business goals the best way possible without, I guess, really isolating anyone and like individually anyway. So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. And I mean, as we develop recurring themes of the show, you mentioned that on the last episode too, of like asking the individual what their goals and aspirations are. It can, and then if once that plan is created and they feel like they are, headed towards those aspirations, it can like build respect and create a sense of belonging in unparalleled ways. Yes, definitely answers my question.
Okay. Well, and also, I think the conversation starts with the leader. It comes from the leader first, and then the right type of relationship will empower and enable, actually, and ennoble that each individual team member to own their plan as well. Right? It's not about just it's a collaborative trajectory, if you will, right? And I'm just noticing like a squirrel run by. Sorry.
Squirrel.
Literally a squirrel. I have to keep an eye on my dog because she'll jump through the glass window if I don't call her name. So
that would make such an entertaining like audio.
Well, it would be like her trying to jump through the glass door, not like obviously successfully doing it, because she would be very, very hurt if that happened.
Yes. And I'm sure it would be a loud thud. We would have to pause recording. But
no, she's okay. She's like too tired too. We're at the end of our day here. So, and you're late out there too. So
yeah, very, very late.
And I guess in terms of like maybe to like put a bookend on this conversation, because I know that we were like, I don't know. Do you feel like we were all over the place tonight?
I don't think so. I think it's interesting that like these themes that we keep on hitting. I mean, we've talked about self-awareness being important. We've talked about how to create a sense of belonging, but like they all did come around the intergenerational communication theme. So like, yes, we're all over the place, but it's also like a nuanced, complicated topic.
It is. And, I think as I'm continuing to learn by doing this show and definitely keep this in because I want to come back and hear myself later. But what I'm learning is there are just some really consistent, powerful things that aren't super fancy that we just need to pay attention to more often. And so while they may not be super fancy, maybe they might seem simple, they're actually also really hard. Self-awareness, I talk about that a lot. And I will tell you, it's because it's the foundation of so much other aspects of being a leader for us to be successful. So, what I'm recognizing is I think, we'll have these types of kind of coming back to these recurring themes types of episode, maybe around a different topic. But what I do want to acknowledge here to my audience is that I'm getting a lot of really great feedback from my listeners already around like what they want to hear more of in terms of topics. And so something I do want to just maybe segue to for people to look forward to in the next episode is I'm going to do a much deeper dive around sleep and its impact on leadership, because I referenced that in our very first episode, Nick, you and I together.
Yes.
And I had so many people say, I never connected the dots. Like, I want to know more about sleep. And I take for granted that people just know everything about sleep and its impact on everything because, I listen to the Huberman podcast and I assume everyone else does. But not everyone does. So what I want to do is I want to extract like all of the right data and research that I think is most relevant for leadership. And that will be my next focus on my next episode, my next solo pod, potentially.
Okay. Yes. Amazing. And that's also like a note to people listening that we want feedback, and we're at we're at the stage where like the audience is growing along with us. So please shoot us a note. We have an email, happyhealthyleaders@gmail.com. or shoot like as a private note on LinkedIn is probably the best place to reach
Yes.
Dr. Jennifer or myself.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Well, and yes,
So
and well, we can talk about all the logistics of that later. I was just thinking, like, I need to get my YouTube page up, Nick.
we will talk about all the logistics of that
Yeah.
later. I like as
Okay.
soon as we stop hitting record. But before then, do you have any parting thoughts? Or like, what makes you? Is there something that makes you really optimistic about all of these generations working together?
Yeah, every time I get to be with my clients in person, and I was reminded of this last week when I was in Chicago, is like most people are really good people. Like we're all like really like we're trying to do our best actually, and like it's the key to like opening up those windows and those doors more to like working through all of this is just to be continue to be kind. I mean, it's amazing just how far like my acknowledging someone by their name who was making my coffee, how much that like it like caught them off guard, and I that's just something I learned from my dad watching him how he treats people growing up. And so I've always done it, and it's just amazing to me like how much we need to get back to doing that more and more is like just acknowledging everyone around us, be kind to each other because at our core we're all really really good people. And once we open that part of our hearts, we're able to have these harder conversations. So that's my parting. Those are my parting words. Just be kind,
Yes.
continue to be kind and say hi to people and like, say their name. It matters a lot. So
Yes, say their name. When we do this with a live studio audience, the crowd will be roaring. That's what I'm picturing right now, Dr. Jennifer. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Happy Healthy Litter podcast. I gave the very first Spotify review, so if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please leave a 5-star review. It helps the show immensely. Also, hit follow and subscribe depending on your show to get the episodes automatically populated. We release episodes every other week, so we will see you back in the feed 2 weeks from today.
awesome. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Talk
See
to
ya.
everyone soon. Bye bye.